We've all been there, or at least know someone who has. You sit in an armchair, look at a guy in a lab coat, and dump all your life's problems on him. Psychologist, psychiatrist, therapist, the idea is always the same. Find someone who gets you and helps you sort out your messes. We grew up seeing this in movies like Good Will Hunting, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or more recent shows. There's always that wise professional who, with a few pointed questions, can unravel the mysteries of the human mind. It's comforting, right? But what if I told you your therapist could be far more dangerous than your own traumas? What if, instead of healing you, he was molding you into something much worse? That's the exact premise of Hannibal, one of the most disturbing and brilliant series ever made. It's the story of Will Graham, an FBI profiler who can get inside the minds of serial killers, and Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a psychiatrist with a very specific appetite. Hannibal isn't just your standard crime procedural, it's a psychological game where the line between hunter and prey is constantly blurred, all with breathtaking visual aesthetics and dialogue that sticks in your mind. So today, to embrace this crazy serial killer vibe, we're going to summarize the entire story of all 3 seasons, from beginning to end.
Fully appreciate the beauty in art.
Here we meet Will Graham, an FBI guy with a bizarre ability. He can recreate crime scenes in his head, thinking exactly like the killer. You can already tell this isn't going to be good for his mental health. Special Agent Jack Crawford calls Will in to help with a sinister case involving a serial killer who has abducted 8 college girls. The investigation leads them to the home of the latest victim, Elise Nichols, and the scene is stomach-turning. The girl was found dead in her own bed. Forensics finds antler velvet and a piece of metal in her wounds, and Will figures it out instantly. The victim was mounted on deer antlers. To make matters worse, the killer removed her liver, saw it had cancer, and put it back. The conclusion? They're hunting a cannibal.
He's eating them.
Will starts having nightmares about the case, completely haunted by what he does. Crawford, concerned, asks for help from Dr. Alana Bloom, who recommends the most elegant and professional psychiatrist in town, a certain Dr. Hannibal Lecter. Suddenly, another body turns up, this time in an open field, also mounted on a deer's head, but without lungs. The killer earns the nickname the Minnesota Shrike, but Will, with his empathy superpower, realizes this is the work of a copycat. Meanwhile, we see Lecter himself cooking and dining on the lungs. Lecter and Will follow a lead to a suspect, Garrett Jacob Hobbs. And here's the irony. Hannibal makes an anonymous call to Hobbs warning him they know. When the pair arrives at his house, all hell breaks loose. Hobbs kills his wife in front of them and takes his daughter Abigail hostage. Will doesn't hesitate and fills Hobbs with bullets, but not before the guy lunges at his own daughter. Before dying, Hobbs taunts Will. Will is having nightmares about Garrett Jacob Hobbs at a shooting range. To help, Crawford takes him to the killer's cabin, a bizarre place filled with taxidermy animals and antlers on the walls. Crawford thinks his daughter Abigail was an accomplice, helping to lure the victims, but Will finds a strand of hair that proves someone else was involved. After the shooting, Will has to undergo a psychological evaluation with Dr. Lecter, who cleverly clears him to return to work. Soon after, a new case. Bodies are found buried alive, serving as fertilizer for mushrooms. In the middle of the crime scene, the redhead shows up, taking pictures and trying to get a scoop, and things get even more tense. Will discovers one of the victims is still alive. In therapy, Lecter suggests that maybe the new killer just wants a connection. And speaking of connections, Lecter's next patient is the redhead herself. He immediately pegs her as Freddie Lowndes, the blogger, and discovers she recorded his session with Will, forcing her to delete everything. The investigation into the mushroom bodies reveals the victims had drug-induced diabetes. This means the killer is a pharmacist.
Changes their medication, so he's a doctor or a pharmacist, or he works somewhere in medical services.
The FBI raids a pharmacy to arrest a guy named Eldon Stamets, but he escapes because Freddie Lowndes leaked the operation on our blog. The situation escalates when Stamets, the pharmacist, corners Freddie and demands to speak with Will, thinking they are the same. She, of course, tells him where Abigail is. Stamets breaks into the hospital to get the girl, but Will shows up and shoots him, saying, "You don't understand me." In his next session with Lecter, Will admits he didn't see Hobbs's ghost this time, and that killing Stamets felt righteous. Lecter, with all his calm, compares this feeling to feeling like God, who kills just to feel powerful. Abigail finally wakes up from her coma, and things get chaotic. Will keeps insisting that there's a copycat killer who murdered the girl, and that it was him who tipped off Hobbs. But Crawford isn't buying it and still thinks Abigail was her father's accomplice. To add more fuel to the fire, the ever-troublesome blogger Freddie Lowndes tells the dear victim's brother, Nicholas Boyle, that Abigail is awake. Lecter and Will take Abigail back to her house, where they find Nicholas, and she attacks him. Later, they all go to Hobbs's cabin, supposedly to help Abigail overcome her trauma, but the plan goes wrong. Blood starts dripping from the ceiling, and that's when they discover the body of their neighbor, Marissa. Will is shocked, and the discovery only strengthens his copycat theory, but Crawford remains skeptical. Back at her house, Abigail makes the worst discovery of all. She finds a clump of hair from one of the victims inside a pillow her father made. At that moment, Nicholas Boyle shows up again, and in a panic, Abigail ends up killing him. Lecter, who's no fool, arrives and says the scene looks more like a massacre than self-defense. Then Hannibal shows who's running the game. He knocks out Dr. Bloom, who was with them, and stages the entire scene to frame the deceased Boyle for everything, including the neighbor's death and his own sister's. It's at this moment that it finally clicks for Abigail. It was Lecter who called and warned her father. He then proposes a sick pact. He'll hide her murder, and she'll hide his secret. With few options, she accepts. Two families are found murdered, and the pattern is bizarre. The mothers were the last to die. The only link between the cases are the sons, who had been on a missing persons list for a year. Graham figures out the play instantly.
We're ready to go when you are, and you're ready to go now, so let's go.
These lost boys are killing their old families to forge a stronger bond with the new family they found. In his sessions with Dr. Lecter, Graham unloads. He confesses that even if he finds the boys, he can never give back what they've lost, their families. He also admits he's starting to feel like a father figure to Abigail Hobbs, the survivor from the last case, and that it makes him deeply uncomfortable. And speaking of Lecter, the guy has a very strange interest in Abigail. He just goes and checks her out of the hospital against Dr. Bloom's wishes and takes her to his home. To help with her nightmares, he gives her some hallucinogenic mushroom tea. Totally normal, right? Meanwhile, Bloom helps Graham realize the boys are under the influence of a powerful and mysterious mother figure. Using security camera footage from a convenience store, they manage to track the group to North Carolina. The team arrives just in the nick of time, stopping another boy from killing his own family and joining the club. Things start off tense with Graham sleepwalking in the middle of the road. The police find him and take him home. The next day, he tells Lecter everything, who blames it on work stress and of course on his boss, Crawford. Soon after, a new case emerges. In a motel room, a couple is found kneeling as if in prayer, the skin on their backs shaped into wings. Graham dives into the killer's mind and concludes, the guy is turning his victims into guardian angels because he's terrified of dying in his sleep. Forensics confirms it. The killer has a brain tumor. Meanwhile, Crawford's wife, Bella, goes to see Lecter for therapy. She's hiding a serious illness from her husband, and our dear cannibal doctor uses the opportunity to drive a wedge between Graham and Crawford. During one of their meetings, the tension is so thick that Lecter just sniffs Graham, who is obviously totally weirded out by it.
I changed the aftershave.
The investigation reveals that the killer, Elliot Budish, has a childhood trauma involving a fire. He sees himself as a vigilante since his victims were criminals, but when the team arrives at his farm, it's too late. The guy has committed suicide and turned himself into his own angel. The failure rattles Graham, who considers quitting, but Crawford gives him a pep talk. In the end, Graham decides to stay with the team. This time, the trouble is at a psychiatric hospital. A patient, Dr. Abel Gideon, murders a nurse, mimicking the style of the Chesapeake Ripper, a serial killer who's been missing for 2 years, the exact same amount of time Gideon has been locked up. Could he be the one? This gets to Crawford, who is still haunted by the disappearance of his trainee, Miriam Lass, who vanished while investigating the Ripper. To make matters worse, Crawford receives a prank call with Miriam's voice asking for help. The theory? The real Ripper is using a recording to mess with him. To lure the killer out, they hatch a plan with the gossip journalist Freddie Lowndes, publish that Gideon is the Ripper. The idea is that the real culprit won't stand for someone else taking the credit and will show himself. Lecter, upon reading the news, is not pleased. Soon after, a macabre new clue. A severed arm is found holding Miriam's cell phone. Along with it, a note. What do you see? And now, the mind-blowing plot twist. In a flashback, we see Miriam visiting none other than Dr. Lecter 2 years ago. She finds his drawings, which match the Ripper's murders. Before she can react, Lecter attacks her from behind. Yes, folks, Hannibal Lecter has been the Chesapeake Ripper all along. Lecter is all emotional at an opera, being the first to give a standing ovation. Afterward, he meets a friend, but one of his patients, Franklin, shows up to kill the mood and introduce his friend, Tobias Budge. Meanwhile, Graham and Crawford are called to a motel room. The scene, a guy dead in a bathtub. Using his empathy superpower, Graham realizes the killer didn't mean to kill the man. In fact, he tried to save him from a heart attack and bungled the job. Because of this, he rules out the famous Chesapeake Ripper. Back in therapy, Franklin basically begs to be Lecter's friend. Lecter shuts him down like, "I'm your therapist, not your buddy."
I am a source of stability and clarity, Franklin. I'm not your friend.
For a laugh, he tries the same line on his therapist, Dr. Bedelia, who also refuses his friendship. Cut to a while back. A doctor was incredibly rude to Lecter during a checkup. Now in the present, the doctor's body shows up on a bus, not entirely in one piece. Graham confirms it. This time, it's the Chesapeake Ripper. Lecter switches into full psychopath mode and starts preparing some ingredients. Graham, for his part, is so messed up by the Hobbs incident that he starts having hallucinations of Abigail and even misses an appointment with Lecter. The BAU discovers the organ thief from the motel is a frustrated paramedic. And who saves the victim in the middle of the police operation? Lecter himself, who was there assisting the team. In the end, Lecter reveals to Graham that he used to be a surgeon and, as if it were nothing, prepares a gourmet dinner using some rather suspicious ingredients. The therapy session starts with Franklin freaking out that his friend Tobias might be a psychopath, but Lecter is more concerned with Franklin's own stalker-like obsession with him. The BAU finds a crime scene straight out of a horror movie, a murdered musician. Using his little power, Graham sees the killer playing the body like an instrument and, to top it off, sees the ghost of Garrett Jacob Hobbs in the audience. He tells Lecter everything, who deduces the killer was serenading another killer. In another session, Franklin tells Lecter that Tobias had described this exact murder to him. That's when the penny drops. Tobias wanted Lecter to know. With that, Lecter decides to pay a visit to Tobias's shop. Meanwhile, Graham's sanity is circling the drain. He's hearing hallucinations of suffering animals and, on impulse, kisses Bloom. She reciprocates but quickly pulls back, saying it would be a terrible idea to get involved with someone so unstable. That night, Lecter is having dinner with Tobias, who just confesses everything, reveals he knows Lecter is also a killer, and proposes a villain partnership. Lecter politely declines.
I know exactly how you feel, but I don't want to be your friend.
Graham shows up. Tobias bolts out the window, and Lecter, playing dumb, gives Graham a clue to go after the guy. Graham finds dead cops, Tobias attacks him, takes a bullet to the ear, and flees. And where does he run? To Lecter's office. While Franklin tries to calm his friend down, Lecter, out of nowhere, snaps his neck. End of the line for Franklin. Then a brutal fight breaks out between Lecter and Tobias. It's a flurry of stabs, but Lecter finishes the guy off with a statue to the head. His excuse is perfect. Tobias came to kill the witnesses. In his own therapy, Lecter says he might have found a friend in Graham. The BAU comes across a bizarre scene on a beach, a totem made of bodies, ranging from recent victims to skeletons dating back decades. As Graham uses his power to investigate, he just blacks out and reappears in Lecter's office, hours away with no memory of anything. Lecter suggests his mind is trying to escape the dirty work. Meanwhile, Abigail is having nightmares, and the journalist Lowndes convinces her to write a tell-all book about her father. Graham's brain is completely blue screening. He even starts lecturing to an empty classroom at the FBI Academy. Bloom shows up, says she regrets turning him down, but reaffirms she can't be with him because he's unstable. To make matters worse, the body of Nicholas Boyle, the guy Abigail killed, is found. Crawford pressures Abigail, who denies everything, but soon after, she confesses to Lecter that she was the one who dug up the body, making him furious. The totem pole case is solved. An old man killed his lover's husband decades ago and kept killing for pleasure. The plot twist? The most recent victim was, unbeknownst to him, his own biological son. With his psychopath radar, Graham figures out Abigail killed Boyle. He confronts Lecter, who confesses to helping hide the body, claiming self-defense. Graham reluctantly agrees to keep the secret. At dinner, Abigail drops the final bomb on Lecter. She not only knew about her father's crimes, but helped him lure victims by befriending them. Lecter, who deep down had already figured it all out, simply embraces her. A flashback confirms everything, showing her father telling her to make friends with one of the girls. In Delaware, a woman named Beth LeBeau is fixing her roof when she's attacked by an intruder. The scene turns gruesome. The killer carves a Glasgow smile into her face, and she dies. Disturbing is an understatement. Meanwhile, Graham is in therapy with Lecter, admitting he feels like he's losing his grip on reality.
Do you feel alive, Will?
I feel like I'm fading.
Like when you pull an all-nighter gaming and can't tell if it's day or night. To test him, Lecter asks him to draw a clock. Graham thinks he did fine, but Lecter notices the numbers are all out of order, a very bad sign. Graham's head is melting. He starts losing hours of his memory, and in the middle of a hallucination, contaminates Beth's crime scene. Crawford is already suspicious of his sanity, but Graham insists everything is under control. Lecter, acting like a good friend, refers him to a neurologist, Dr. Sutcliffe. The scan shows Graham has a serious illness called encephalitis, but Lecter, the master manipulator, convinces the doctor to lie and say he found nothing. The goal? To continue studying Graham's brain as if he were a lab rat. Graham returns to the victim's house and is attacked by the killer, who manages to escape. Suddenly, he finds himself in the middle of the woods, not knowing what's real and what's not. He calls Katz, who confirms he really was attacked, and the killer even left a piece of skin behind. Lecter deduces the killer has Cotard syndrome, a bizarre condition that makes her believe she's dead and unable to recognize faces. The killer, Georgia Machin, starts watching Graham's house. During another scan, Graham finds the hospital empty and Dr. Sutcliffe dead. He manages to calm Georgia down, and she's taken for treatment, but the twist comes in a flashback. It was Lecter who killed the doctor and handed the scissors to Georgia, who, because of her syndrome, couldn't even see his face. At a dinner, Chilton is venting to Lecter. He's afraid that Abel Gideon, the psychopathic surgeon, will destroy his career by accusing him of manipulation. And just like that, the next day, Gideon escapes custody. Elsewhere, the BAU team comes across bodies hanging from the trees like some grotesque Halloween decoration. Graham realizes right away it's not the Chesapeake Ripper. It's someone else trying to get his attention. That someone is Gideon, and he's heading back to Baltimore. Graham and Bloom interrogate Chilton, who is now the fugitive's target. Chilton confirms Gideon wants to prove that he is the real Ripper.
I did not convince him that he was a serial killer. I just reminded him of the fact.
Meanwhile, Graham's encephalitis gets worse. He has a high fever and starts seeing hallucinations of deer antlers growing everywhere. The BAU concludes that Gideon is hunting the psychiatrists who treated him, and Graham fears Bloom is next. Gideon sets a trap for journalist Freddie Lowndes, killing a doctor right in front of her. He then kidnaps both Lowndes and Chilton, planning to injure the doctor and leave him behind as a gift basket for the real Ripper. Graham speculates that the real Ripper left a clue to find Gideon. The team rushes to the old observatory where they find Chilton struggling to stay conscious while Lowndes fights to keep him alive. Gideon has fled, but Graham, following a hallucination of a stag, finds him. Except in his mind, he doesn't see Gideon. He sees the ghost of Garrett Jacob Hobbs. In his delirium, Graham takes Hobbs to Lecter. Lecter takes advantage of the confusion, convinces Graham it was all a hallucination, and manipulates him into going after Gideon at Bloom's house. Graham arrives, shoots Gideon, and collapses. Later, Bedelia, Lecter's therapist, warns him he needs to stop getting so involved with Graham. Graham visits Georgia in her hyperbaric chamber, and she seems to be improving. She warns him not to trust the doctors. Following a casual comment from Graham, Lecter, out of pure malice, leaves a metal comb in the chamber. Georgia accidentally causes a spark, and the chamber bursts into flames. End of the line for her. Meanwhile, Abigail starts working with the journalist Lowndes on a book, but hides the details that would incriminate her in Nicholas Boyle's death. The BAU investigates Georgia's death. Crawford thinks it was suicide, but Graham disagrees and believes it was the work of a Garrett Jacob Hobbs copycat. Worried, Crawford confronts Lecter, who gives some very evasive answers. Crawford even visits Bedelia, Lecter's therapist, to try to get some information. She doesn't say much, but tells a story about a patient Lecter referred to her who ended up attacking her. Graham asks Abigail for help to catch the copycat and takes her to Hobbs's old cabin. He tells Lecter his plan and his theory. Dr. Sutcliffe's killer was planning to frame him. Crawford, on the other hand, discovers Abigail was on the same train as some of her father's victims, and concludes that she is the killer.
She kills Marissa Shore in memoriam, then she kills Nicholas Boyle to cover her tracks?
When Crawford arrives to arrest Abigail, he finds Graham has already left with her. He confronts Lecter, who defends himself and shows recordings in which Graham, delirious, confesses to killing Georgia and Sutcliffe. Lecter suggests Graham thinks he's Hobbs and might want to finish what Hobbs started, kill his own daughter. At the cabin, Graham finally understands that Hobbs used Abigail as bait. Suddenly, he wakes up on a plane, heading home, with no sign of Abigail. She's at her old house with Lecter, who admits to having killed more people than her father. When she she asks if he's going to kill her, he replies, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you in this life." Game over for Abigail. And in the end, the tables turned in a bizarre way. After an entire season of watching Will Graham get psychologically manipulated, the guy ended up exactly where Hannibal Lecter wanted him, locked up in an asylum. Lecter managed to plant all the false clues and made everyone, including the FBI, believe that Graham was the real killer. The final scene is practically an homage to The Silence of the Lambs, but with the roles completely reversed. Now, it's Graham who's behind bars, in a maximum security cell, and Dr. Lecter who comes to pay a visit, all polite and concerned. It's the height of irony and sadism. The entire season was built to show Graham as the great victim of this story, a man who was pushed to the limit and broke. Lecter didn't just win the game, he also sat in the good guy psychopath's chair to watch the damage up close, analyzing his creation. The season closes with this powerful image: Graham, the hero, seen as a monster, and Lecter, the monster, seen as a helpful friend. What a cruel twist, but hold on, because here comes the gut punch. We see Hannibal Lecter and Jack Crawford in a fight worthy of an action movie in Hannibal's kitchen. There are knives flying, fists swinging, and Crawford even tries to strangle the doctor. But Hannibal is a tough nut to crack. He pretends to faint and, at the first opportunity, attacks Jack. Bleeding profusely, Jack manages to lock himself in the pantry while Hannibal, cool as ever, tries to break down the door. But wait, that's a flash forward. 12 weeks earlier, the mood was different. Lecter and Crawford are having dinner, but the tension is already in the air. Everyone is under investigation for the screw-up with Will Graham. An investigator named Cade Purnell is on Crawford's case, and Dr. Alana Bloom refuses to withdraw her complaint against him for pushing Will too hard. Meanwhile, Will is in prison, being analyzed by Dr. Chilton and getting visits from Hannibal himself, who seems to enjoy the misery. This is where Will's mind starts to clear. He has a bizarre flashback of Lecter forcing Abigail's ear down his throat with a tube. He tells Jack, but without proof, nobody believes him. To make matters worse, a new case emerges. A killer who is collecting bodies. A young man named Roland Umber is kidnapped and wakes up sewn to a pile of corpses inside a silo. Yes, sewn. What a nightmare. Roland Umber trying to escape the silo. He manages to tear himself away from the other bodies, ripping his own skin in the process, but the killer appears. In a desperate chase through a cornfield, Roland finds himself cornered at the edge of a cliff and jumps, but ends up dying when he hits a rock. Meanwhile, Dr. Bedelia finally puts her foot down. She dismisses Hannibal as a patient, telling him to his face that he's too dangerous and she can't help him. Brave woman. Even in prison, Graham's mind remains sharp. Looking at the case photos, he figures out the killer is creating a human mural with the bodies, a kind of macabre work of art. Agent Beverly Katz keeps asking for his help and, in return, promises to investigate Hannibal to prove Will's innocence. Finally, someone on his side. And who finds the silo? Hannibal himself. He climbs onto the roof and sees the art. The bodies form a giant eye. When the FBI arrives, there's a surprise. The original killer has been sewn into the spot Roland left vacant. Graham solves the riddle. It was a second killer. A flashback reveals it was Hannibal who killed the artist, convincing him to become part of his own masterpiece so that God could see him. The ending is pure tension. Dr. Bedelia visits Will and whispers, "I believe you." Soon after, Hannibal goes to her house, presumably to finish her off, but she's already bolted, leaving only a bottle of perfume behind. This woman is a badass. Graham's trial finally begins, and Crawford's boss, Purnell, is putting immense pressure on him to throw Graham to the wolves and save his own skin. But Crawford flips the script. In court, he takes responsibility and says he forced Graham to participate in the crime scenes to get results. Purnell, of course, is furious. Meanwhile, Graham receives a gruesome little gift in prison. The BAU team gets suspicious, wondering if Graham found a way to do this from inside. To make matters worse, journalist Freddie Lowndes testifies that Abigail Hobbs told her Graham was planning to do something terrible to her. Graham's lawyer tries to discredit Lowndes, but the damage is done. Then things get crazy. The knife used to cut the ear was Graham's, and the person who took it from the evidence room was the bailiff, a guy named Sykes. The FBI raids the guy's house, but it's a trap. The house explodes. Inside, they find Sykes' body mounted on a deer head, with a Glasgow smile and missing an ear, a blatant copy of the crimes attributed to Graham. Lecter visits Graham and asks for his help. Graham figures out right away it's another killer because Sykes was shot before being mutilated. Lecter agrees, but convinces him to lie in court to get off. But it's no use. The prosecution convinces the judge that Sykes' death is irrelevant, and Graham is left without a defense. But then, plot twist. The next day, the judge is found dead in the courtroom, holding a scale. Crawford informs Lecter, with this death, a mistrial is guaranteed. Graham is still convinced Lecter is behind everything, and Katz, who visits him, still has her doubts. So, Graham agrees to therapy with Chilton on the condition that Lecter doesn't know. Chilton, who is no fool, uses a truth serum, and Graham's memories come flooding back. He remembers Lecter using lights and psychological manipulation to induce his seizures and hallucinations. Chilton confronts Lecter and forbids him from seeing Graham again. Meanwhile, the BAU finds a bizarre body, a man turned into a human beehive. Soon after, another is found alive in a park, but without his eyes. The link between them? The surgical stitches. At the same time, Bella, Crawford's wife, visits Lecter. As the cancer progresses, she starts to consider giving up on everything, and Lecter even encourages her.
Fully appreciate the beauty and art.
Graham has another flashback, and the penny finally drops. He remembers Gideon at Lecter's house, deducing he was the Chesapeake Ripper. Graham realizes Lecter is a cannibal. He tells Katz everything and warns her to stay away from Hannibal. The beehive killer is an acupuncturist who claims she's giving peaceful deaths to suffering patients, and Bella returns to Lecter's office to die from a morphine overdose. But as she passes out, Lecter, in a sinister twist, saves her life. At the hospital, she wakes up, slaps him across the face, and tells him to get lost. Katz, investigating on her own, breaks into Lecter's house and heads down to the basement. What she sees leaves her in shock. Suddenly, Lecter appears behind her. She draws her gun, he lunges, and all we hear are gunshots and a body hitting the floor. After spending the night at the hospital with his wife, Crawford goes to have breakfast at Lecter's house. Meanwhile, Freddie Lowndes gets an anonymous tip and finds Beverly Katz's body in an observatory. Graham, devastated, is brought to the crime scene, strapped to a gurney and wearing that muzzle mask, just like Hannibal himself. Using his superpower, he figures out that Katz caught the killer red-handed but couldn't get away, and he insists to Crawford it was Hannibal. The autopsy confirms his suspicion, with one disturbing detail. Some parts were replaced with items belonging to the mural killer. Cut to Lecter, calmly preparing dinner. With blood in his eyes, Graham comes up with a plan. He convinces Chilton to let him talk to Gideon, who gives him the lowdown. To catch the Ripper, he'll have to kill him. So Graham makes a deal with Lowndes to use her tabloid to lure out his fan, the copycat killer. The plan works. An orderly named Matthew Brown reveals himself. He admires Graham and confesses to killing the bailiff. Graham doesn't waste time and asks for a little favor. Kill Lecter for me.
I want you to kill Hannibal Lecter.
Alerted by Gideon, Bloom and Crawford rush to warn Hannibal, who is casually swimming in a pool. Too late. Brown shoots a tranquilizer dart at Lecter, kicking off a twisted interrogation to prove he's the Ripper. Crawford arrives and shoots Brown, but with his last breath, the bastard kicks the bucket out from under Lecter's feet. Crawford manages to save him by the skin of his teeth. Crawford comes down hard on Graham, accusing him of sending a killer after Lecter. Graham denies it, but doesn't miss the chance to drop the bombshell. Lecter is the Chesapeake Ripper. He even explains the guy's logic. Hannibal kills 3 to 4 people at a time to keep his food stock up, since he's a cannibal. To make things worse, he warns Crawford that after the next attack, Lecter will host a dinner party, and it doesn't take long for a new figure to appear, a man wielding poisonous flowers. Very artistic, very Hannibal. Crawford goes to Lecter for help, who declines, but with a straight face, invites the head of the FBI to dinner. Meanwhile, Graham discovers that Gideon confessed it was Lecter who sent him to kill Dr. Bloom. Chilton records everything, but Crawford is still hesitant. On the night of the dinner, Crawford, ever the detective, takes some food samples to send to the lab. After the party, Lecter and Bloom finally get together. But Hannibal is anything but romantic. He drugs her wine so she'll sleep for hours, securing his alibi. With Bloom out cold, he goes to the infirmary, kidnaps Gideon, and leaves a dead guard behind, decorated with fishing lures. When Crawford interrogates Lecter the next day, Bloom shows up and confirms she spent the whole night with him, unaware she was being used. Later, we see Lecter serving dinner to Gideon, which is the man's own leg. Back at the lab, the food is clean, but the fishing lures have DNA from several Ripper victims, including Miriam Lass. They finally realize Graham is innocent. The lure also has a rare tree bark that leads Crawford to a farm, where he finds Miriam Lass alive, but missing an arm. Miriam Lass is rescued, but the poor woman is so traumatized she can't remember her kidnapper's face. And things get even crazier. When she's brought face to face with Lecter, she's certain it was not him.
It's not him.
With this twist, Graham is finally released from the asylum. The first thing he does is warn Chilton to be wary of his own methods, because Lecter uses the same manipulative tricks. Graham returns home to find Bloom taking care of his dogs. She apologizes for doubting him, but still blames him for trying to kill Lecter. Seeing that she's involved with Hannibal, he warns her to stay far away from him. Later, while visiting Miriam, he realizes the kidnapper used the same flashing light technique that Lecter used on him. It's the last straw. He goes to Lecter's house and points a gun at him, but in the end, he can't bring himself to shoot. The investigation reaches a crucial point. Lecter's fingerprints are found near the farm where Miriam was held, but they also discover traces of drugs in her blood that only Chilton uses. Hannibal's trap is set. Chilton arrives home to find Gideon's mutilated body in his basement. Seconds later, Lecter appears, drugs Chilton, and kills the FBI agents knocking at the door. He stages the crime scene to frame the doctor. Desperate, Chilton calls Graham for help, but it's too late. He tries to flee but is captured by Crawford. In the interrogation room, Miriam's memory completely glitches. She looks at Chilton and identifies him as the Ripper, snaps, grabs Crawford's gun, and shoots him in the face. And for the grand finale, Graham returns to Lecter's office asking to resume his therapy. The two sit face to face. The hunt is on again. But wait, it gets weirder. In the next episode, Graham, Lecter, and Jack Crawford are having dinner together, as if they were best friends. Meanwhile, a new bizarre case unfolds. A woman is found lifeless inside the womb of a horse. It's a level of strangeness that only this show can deliver. At the same time, we meet the Verger siblings. Mason is a repulsive playboy who mistreats his sister, Margot. She confides in Lecter, saying she wants to kill her brother, and Hannibal, in his own twisted therapist way, practically encourages her.
Be that as it may, if there's no one else to protect you, Margot, you have to protect yourself.
At the horse case autopsy, the bizarre factor only increases. When they open the victim's chest, a live bird flies out. Graham goes to the stable and deduces that the killer wanted the woman to be reborn. The prime suspect is an employee named Peter, but he swears it wasn't him and points to the real culprit, a social worker named Clark, who was abusing the boys he was supposed to be helping. With no evidence, Clark is released and returns to get revenge on Peter, killing a horse to frame him. But the plan goes horribly wrong. When Graham and Lecter get to the stable, they see Peter trying to sew Clark inside a horse so he'd suffer like the others, but Clark manages to get away. Graham draws his gun, ready to put Clark down, but at the last second, Lecter, with absurd speed, blocks the revolver's hammer with his thumb, preventing the shot. He disarms Graham, admitting that for all his manipulation, Will's unpredictability can still surprise him. Sometime later, Graham dreams of tying Lecter to a tree and setting a stag on him. You can already feel the tension. In real life, an innocent truck driver stops at a gas station and, upon returning, notices something on top of his truck. Before he can react, an unidentified beast grabs him, and it's over. Graham and Lecter continue their therapy sessions, which are more like a verbal chess match where each tries to corner the other. On his way out, he bumps into Margot Verger, another of Lecter's patients, and they share a look that says, "What has this crazy psychiatrist done to you?" The FBI team thinks the trucker's death was the work of a trained animal, but Graham consults Peter, that animal expert, and learns the animals might have been manipulated to cooperate. And things get even weirder. At night, a man in a mechanical beast suit attacks and kills a couple. At the crime scene, Graham figures out it was actually a man, not an animal. Lecter, playing both sides as always, tells Crawford that the profile matches a former patient of his, Randall Tier. But before the FBI arrives, Lecter himself visits Tier, praises his growth, and warns him the police are on his tail. When Crawford and Graham interrogate him, Tier denies everything, using his conversation with Lecter as an alibi. Later, Margot visits Graham, and the two connect over their mutual desire to kill someone. Her brother, him, Lecter. Graham even tells Hannibal that Bedelia du Maurier visited him and said, "I believe you," which visibly unnerves the psychiatrist.
Perhaps you should have a more personal conversation with Mr. Tier and ask him what he believes.
With his ego bruised, Lecter sends Tier to Graham's house to finish the job. The costumed madman attacks one of Graham's dogs to lure him outside. But Graham is no fool. He goes back inside, locks the door, turns off the lights, and waits. As soon as Tier jumps through the window, the hunter becomes the hunted. We see the full fight. Graham versus Randall Tier. To Graham, he's not fighting Tier, but the man-stag and even Lecter himself. In the end, he manages to overpower and kill the man. He then brings the body to Lecter's house, making it clear that that the debt between them has been paid. Tyr's body turns up sliced up like a macabre work of art, mounted on a saber-toothed tiger skeleton in a museum. Lecter and Graham analyze the crime scene, pretending they know nothing. Meanwhile, journalist Freddie Lowndes is still on Graham's tail, insisting that Lecter is the real Chesapeake Ripper. In therapy, Margot reveals she can't kill her brother, Mason, because of their father's inheritance. The money goes either to him or a future heir. If Mason dies childless, she gets nothing. Lecter, more manipulative than a soap opera villain, suggests she find an heir. Margot goes to visit her brother, but things spiral out of control when he reveals some truly bizarre ideas. Shocked, she runs to Graham for comfort, and the two end up together. The scene is intercut with Lecter and Alana Bloom also together. In Graham's mind, he sees Bloom in Margot's place, and at the climax, he has a vision of the human form of the Raven Stag, the symbol of the bizarre relationship between him and Lecter. Later, Lowndes warns Bloom that there's a pattern of deaths among Lecter's patients and that he and Graham might be partners. Worried, Lecter goes to Lowndes' house to get rid of her, but she's not there. She is, in fact, at Graham's house, where she finds Tyr's beast suit and, in a freezer, his jawbone. When Graham appears, she flees, calls Crawford, but Graham smashes her car window and captures her. Later, he shows up at Lecter's house with some meat for them to cook. After they eat, Lecter notes it's not pork. Graham simply replies, "It's long pig." Lecter and Graham dine together, discussing the dark new path Graham has taken since his encounter with Freddie Lowndes. Meanwhile, a flaming body in a wheelchair rolls down a parking garage and stops right in the journalist parking spot. The dental records match. It's Lowndes. In therapy, Margot tells Lecter and Graham that she's pregnant with Graham's child. This solves the inheritance problem, but she wants to keep it a secret from her brother. Speak of the devil, Mason, being the psychopath of the year, makes a child cry just to use the tear in his martini. Bizarre. Bloom is extremely concerned about Graham's relationship with Lecter, which she calls destructive. When she asks if he killed Lowndes, Graham, instead of answering, just hands her his gun and tells her to practice. At Lowndes' funeral, Graham's comments imply he's the culprit. Shortly after, Lowndes' body is exhumed and placed in a bizarre pose, like the goddess Shiva. Graham suggests it must be a copycat, sowing more confusion. The manipulation game is at its peak. Things get tight for Margot. She tries to escape the mansion, but Mason's henchman crashes into her car. She wakes up on a surgical table, and Mason reveals that since he can't be the heir's father, he'll ensure she can never have children again, ordering the doctors to sterilize her. Bloom, fed up with the secrets, confronts Crawford. He finally comes clean and takes her to a room where Freddie Lowndes is alive and well. It was all a setup to catch Lecter. When Graham finds out what happened to Margot, he goes to Mason's farm for revenge. He attacks Mason, hangs him over the hungry pigs, but gives up at the last second. Graham realizes Lecter has manipulated everyone like chess pieces. Instead of killing Mason, he has a much better idea. He suggests Mason use the pigs to get rid of the real problem. Hannibal Lecter. The final trap is being set. In a very sinister therapy session, Graham questions Lecter about his treatment and about Mason Verger. He goes serious and asks if Lecter wants to kill Mason, and Lecter, cold as ice, drops this gem. Whenever possible, one should always try to eat the rude. Graham not only agrees, but encourages it.
Maybe you should kill Mason during your next session.
He even imagines a little scene, himself feeding Lecter to Mason's pigs. In his session with Mason, Lecter is visibly fed up with the man's arrogance. Mason is so clueless, he threatens Lecter with a knife and even criticizes his art. To top it off, he brags about playing Russian roulette with his own sister Margot. Lecter, of course, tells this to Graham and Margot, who feels humiliated by a surgery her brother arranged to make her infertile. Lecter gives her some master-level advice. Her victory isn't killing Mason, but outliving him. Meanwhile, Crawford wants more evidence to catch Lecter. His ace in the hole? None other than Bedelia du Maurier, Lecter's former psychiatrist, who's in an interrogation room. Graham offers her immunity, and she confesses. She killed a patient in the past, and Lecter manipulated her into doing it. She warns Graham that Lecter will do the same to him. Graham's fantasy becomes reality when Mason's henchmen kidnap Lecter. At the farm, Lecter is hanging over the pigs, just like in the dream. Mason hands Graham a knife and tells him to finish the job. But then comes the plot twist. Graham cuts Lecter's ropes. He collapses in the middle of the chaos, and when he comes to, he finds a trail of blood, a body, and no sign of Lecter or Mason. The next scene is pure horror. Graham comes home and finds Mason there, laughing hysterically while feeding the dogs. Lecter appears, completely cold and indifferent. Graham simply leaves the final decision to Lecter, who breaks Mason's neck. Later, we see Mason, now paralyzed, lying to Crawford that he fell into the pig pen. And who's going to take care of him? His sister Margot. Karma's a bitch. Lecter Lecter sends a letter to Crawford inviting him to dinner. This sounds as wrong as pineapple on pizza, Crawford tells Graham, and now our protagonist is in the middle of a tug of war, promising loyalty to both sides. This is not going to end well. Lecter pays a visit to Bella, Crawford's wife, who is dying of cancer. In a surprisingly human moment, she forgives him for saving her before and asks him to save Crawford after she's gone.
Will you save him for me?
Meanwhile, Graham is already preparing for the worst. He asks journalist Freddie Lowndes not to publish anything about Abigail Hobbs, but gives her free rein to write about him and Lecter, since he doesn't even know if he'll make it out alive. Later, he and Lecter destroy patient files, but Lecter smells Lowndes on Graham's clothes. Betrayal is in the air. Crawford's boss arrives to crash the party. She cancels the operation, suspends Crawford, and orders everyone arrested, including Graham. The plan has gone to hell. Bloom manages to warn Graham, who flees and calls Lecter with the message that seals his fate. They know. Then chaos erupts. Crawford goes to Lecter's house, and the two engage in a brutal fight. Lecter stabs Crawford in the neck, who manages to lock himself in the pantry as he bleeds out. Bloom arrives to find Lecter, tries to shoot him, but the trickster had already emptied her gun. She runs upstairs and comes face to face with the series' biggest ghost, Abigail, alive. Before we can process it, Abigail apologizes and shoves Bloom out the window. Graham arrives to find Bloom broken on the ground in the rain. He enters the house and is also shocked to see Abigail. Lecter appears from behind and without ceremony stabs Graham with a linoleum knife. He gives a speech about how Graham rejected his gift and tried to change him, and for the grand finale, right in front of Graham, he goes after Abigail. Lecter simply walks out into the rain, past everyone dying on the floor. In the post-credits scene, he's on a plane, cool as can be, with Bedelia by his side. Vacation time. We go back in time with a few flashbacks. We see Abel Gideon having dinner with Lecter, whom he perceives as the devil. As they philosophize about cannibalism, Lecter remarks, "It's only cannibalism if we're equals." In another moment, we see how Bedelia, the former psychiatrist, woke up to discover she had killed a violent patient, and who shows up to help clean the scene and craft a good story? Lecter himself. Now we understand why she's tied to him. In the present, we're in Paris. A stylish man on a motorcycle crosses the city. It's Lecter. He's got his eye on a certain Dr. Roman Fell. At an event, another man, Anthony Dimmond, recognizes Lecter but addresses him by Fell's name. Now in Florence, Lecter and Bedelia are living as the Fell couple. Everything is going well until Dimmond, the guy from the party, shows up again. Instead of getting rid of him, Lecter, bold as brass, invites the man to dinner. During the meal, Dimmond realizes the ingredients are the same ones Lecter used to season Abel Gideon. He confronts Lecter about the real Fell's whereabouts. The answer comes quickly and brutally. Lecter kills Dimmond in front of Bedelia. He confronts her. Is she merely observing, or is she participating? Since she did nothing to stop it, the conclusion is obvious. She's an accomplice. At the end, we see Lecter on a train, remembering Gideon's prophecy that one day he too would be caught. The scene cuts to a chapel, where we find Lecter's latest macabre work of art. Dimmond's torso has been transformed into a kind of origami, folded to look like a giant heart, typical of our favorite cannibal. Thought Graham was a goner after Lecter's stabbing? You thought wrong, sucker. He wakes up in the hospital, and to everyone's surprise, Abigail Hobbs is also alive. She explains that Lecter knew exactly where to cut for them both to survive. The cuts were surgical, almost a psychopath's caress, and the weirdest part, even after almost dying, Abigail still defends Lecter like a crazy fan. She says Graham shouldn't have conspired against him. Stockholm Syndrome says hi. 8 months later, we see Graham and Abigail in Italy, in a place Lecter called his memory palace. They're there reflecting on how the cannibal sees himself as a god. The local police are also in the area, investigating a human torso that was sculpted into the shape of a heart. It's here that Graham meets Inspector Pazzi, a man who's been after Lecter for ages and calls him Il Mostro, the monster of Florence. Pazzi shows Graham a photo of the victim, which activates his supernatural CSI mode, and he has a twisted vision featuring the usual stag. That's when it hits him. Abigail really did die that night. Her image vanishes, and who do we see spying from a distance? Lecter himself. Graham and Pazzi descend into the catacombs after him, but the guy is slippery and disappears. Alone in the darkness, knowing Lecter is listening, Graham says the most unexpected thing of all: "I forgive you." A little dinner party at Lecter's place in Florence. He and Bedelia are entertaining a guest, Sogliato. In the middle of the conversation, Lecter suddenly attacks him with an ice pick. Sogliato starts laughing nervously, until Bedelia, with utter coldness, calmly pulls the object out. The man collapses. Technically, she's the one who finished the job. Meanwhile, Graham has gone on a dark European tour, breaking into the old Lecter estate in Lithuania. The place is abandoned, but he finds a woman named Chio, and in the basement, a man locked in a cage. Chio explains that this prisoner is the one who killed and ate Lecter's little sister, Misha. She's kept the man there for years, like some kind of guardian. Back in Florence, Crawford is also alive and teams up with Pazzi to hunt our favorite cannibal. In Lithuania, Graham, who is done playing games, releases the prisoner. The man obviously attacks Chio, who is forced to kill him. It was all a plan by Graham to prove that she, too, was just a pawn on Lecter's manipulative chessboard. To top it off, he arranges the man's body like a giant dragonfly. Macabre art. In the end, Bedelia realizes Lecter didn't just take Misha's life, he consumed her, as if it were a twisted form of forgiveness. And then comes the twist. To forgive Graham, he feels he must do the same. Remember Dr. Chilton, the one who got shot in the face? Well, he's back, but he's a bit patched up, like a horror movie doll, missing an eye, wearing a fake tooth, and using makeup to hide the mess. He goes to visit Mason Verger, who is also completely disfigured and wants revenge. Mason offers a $1 million bounty for Lecter's head. The hunt is on. Chilton tries to convince Graham to get in on the action, but the big reveal comes when Crawford questions him. Graham confesses that he warned Lecter about the trap not only because he considered him a friend, but because he was planning to run away with him. It's the most toxic bromance in history. Meanwhile, Alana Bloom has also recovered from her fall and joins the dark side, becoming Mason Verger's therapist and helping with his revenge plot. The plan? To feed Lecter to the pigs. Literally. Crawford's wife dies of cancer, and to make matters worse, Lecter sends a condolence card. It's trolling on a psychopathic level. Crawford and Bloom team up to catch the cannibal, but they don't know one thing. Graham has already gotten a head start and has set off for Italy by boat. The hunt has begun, and our protagonist is already out of the gate. Graham and Chio are heading to Florence by train. Along the way, she tells him she was something of an attendant to Lady Murasaki, and that Lecter deeply disturbed her. Meanwhile, in Florence, Lecter is chilling with Bedelia, talking about his plan to have Graham for dinner when he finds him. Also in Florence, Crawford scatters Bella's ashes in the river, and with them goes his wedding ring. Goodbye past. Later, he has dinner with Inspector Pazzi, who reveals he's hunting Lecter on his own to cash in on Mason Verger's bounty. The problem is, Pazzi is a bit of an amateur. He visits Lecter, tries to get some information, but leaves empty-handed. Back on the train, Chio, who claimed to be Graham's friend, simply pushes him off the moving train. Graham survives, but now he has to continue on foot. Poor guy just can't catch a break. Pazzi, oblivious to the danger, makes a $3 million deal with Mason to deliver Lecter alive, but he needs his fingerprint. He returns to Lecter's palace and tries to get the print with a knife. Obviously, it goes wrong. Lecter, who wasn't born yesterday, knocks the guy out. When Pazzi wakes up, he's tied to a handcart. Lecter throws him out the window, mirroring exactly how his historical ancestor was portrayed. Down below, who's watching the scene? Crawford. He rushes up, spoiling for a fight, and lunges at Lecter in a brutal brawl. Crawford manages to throw Lecter out the window, but the guy is a ninja. He uses Pazzi's body to cushion the fall and walks away, wounded but alive. As Lecter flees through the streets of Florence, Graham finally arrives in the city and meets up with Crawford to discuss Pazzi's screw-up. Graham confesses that a part of him still wants Lecter to escape. It's the Stockholm Syndrome we love. Lecter meets with Bedelia, who decides to stay behind. She knows that one day Lecter would eat her, yet they still share a kiss. To maintain her Mistress Fell disguise and not give Lecter away, she injects herself with heroin to appear as a victim when the police arrive. Back in the US, Mason is pissed about losing Pazzi and is already thinking about bribing another cop, but Alana Bloom warns him that to catch Hannibal, he'll need an entire department. Graham and Crawford interrogate Bedelia, but don't buy her story. Later, Graham finds Lecter in an art gallery. They chat like old friends, except Graham has a knife hidden, ready to strike. But Chio is on a roof with a sniper rifle and shoots Graham in the shoulder. Seriously, whose side is this woman on? Lecter takes the wounded Graham to a hideout, removes the bullet, and then ties him to a dinner table. Crawford finds them, but Lecter catches him off guard, knocking him out. With his audience secured, Lecter picks up a cranial saw and walks toward Graham. Suddenly, the scene cuts. Graham and Lecter are hanging from meat hooks, upside down. Mason appears and says, "Welcome to Muskrat Farm." The police who took Lecter and Graham were actually Mason Verger's goons. They were going to off Crawford too, but Chio shows up and saves the day, killing the corrupt cops. At Muskrat Farm, Mason reveals his macabre plan. He's going to eat Lecter and then peel off Graham's face to wear as a mask. Meanwhile, Margot and Alana Bloom, now a couple, are trying to figure out a way to have an heir, but Mason is already one step ahead and claims he's arranged a bizarre solution. The fetus, of course, is stillborn. Bloom makes a deal with the devil. She'll free Lecter if he promises to save Graham. Lecter keeps his promise in his own way. He kills Cordell, Mason's doctor, who wakes up from the anesthesia in sheer panic. Margot finally confronts her brother. Alana reveals she got Mason's sperm with a cattle prod while he was out cold. In the struggle, Margot shoves Mason's pet eel down his throat, suffocating the bastard to death. A poetic end. With Chio's help, Lecter takes Graham home. There, the two say their goodbyes. Graham says he'll let him escape but wants nothing more to do with him. But just as the police arrive, Lecter himself surrenders right in front of Graham, as if it were all part of his grand show. Here we meet a new guy, Francis Dollarhide. He's at a diner and sees a Time magazine article about the Great Red Dragon paintings. He's so inspired that he starts working out like a maniac and gets the entire painting tattooed on his back. You can already tell, he's completely obsessed with the artwork. Cut to 3 years later. Lecter has been caught and is locked up in the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane. He pleaded insanity and now spends his days chatting with Bloom, who has become the new hospital administrator. He also dines with Dr. Chilton, who retired to become an author. Meanwhile, Dollarhide's obsession has taken a darker turn. He's seen talking to his own cleft lip, and at one point appears bloodied outside a house. During a dinner, Chilton mentions a certain Tooth Fairy, who is Dollarhide himself, a serial killer who murders families on every full moon. Chilton later discovers that Lecter wrote an article just to trash him and his theories. And Dollarhide, he's putting together a scrapbook of his crimes and Lecter's. Jack Crawford seeks out a retired Graham, who is now married to a woman named Molly and has a stepson, Walter. Crawford wants his help to catch the Tooth Fairy, but Graham is traumatized and wants to leave his past with Lecter behind. After much discussion, Molly convinces Graham to go. He even finds a letter from Lecter, who already knew about Crawford's visit, warning him not to get involved. But Graham goes anyway. In Buffalo, he uses his ability to recreate the crime scene and discovers that the killer likes to see himself reflected in the victim's eyes. To understand the Tooth Fairy's mind, Graham decides to visit Lecter. After 3 years, the two come face to face again in his cell. Remember Abigail Hobbs? A flashback shows that Lecter staged everything to make it look like she died, even using a spray to splatter her blood around the house. In an even more surreal flashback, we see Lecter in a therapy session with Abigail. He convinces her to perform something bizarre, and the girl complies, leaving Lecter impressed. On the night of the massacre at Lecter's house, he receives Graham's warning and tells Abigail they will hunt together. Back in the present, Graham visits Lecter to ask for help with the Tooth Fairy, and Lecter, of course, accepts.
I want you to help me, Dr. Lecter.
Yes, I thought so.
Graham also talks to Bloom, who drops a bombshell. She's living with Margot Verger, and the two have a son who will inherit the entire Verger fortune. Lecter, upon analyzing the cases, deduces that the Tooth Fairy kills families in order to transform himself. Bloom quickly shuts Lecter down, threatening to revoke his privileges if he tries any funny business. Meanwhile, Dollarhide starts hallucinating that he has a dragon's tail. At one of the crime scenes, Graham finds the red dragon mahjong symbol carved into a tree and runs into Freddie Lowndes. He gets pissed at her for using photos of him without permission. Lowndes, without missing a beat, publishes an article about Graham and Lecter's meeting. Dollarhide reads the article and goes to a film processing lab where he meets a blind employee, Reba McLean. He offers to take her home, but freaks out when she asks to touch his face. Graham starts having nightmares where he is the Tooth Fairy. The episode closes with Lecter receiving a call from his lawyer, who is actually Dollarhide, saying he is becoming the Great Red Dragon. Dollarhide is practicing his speech to call Lecter's hospital, and we see the beginning of their conversation from the last episode. He even imagines a therapy session with Hannibal, explaining how the Great Red Dragon controls him. Meanwhile, Bedelia du Maurier, Lecter's former psychiatrist, is giving a lecture about her experience with him. Graham shows up to confront her, accusing her of siding with Lecter, but she throws it back in his face that he can't let go either. Dollarhide takes Reba to a zoo for a unique experience, to touch a sleeping tiger. The scene is intense, but everything turns out fine. Afterward, they go to his place and things get intimate. But later, he wakes up and has a hallucination. The dragon wants him to kill Reba. Far away, Lecter manages to use the hospital phone to secretly get Graham's address and phone number. Graham questions Bedelia again, and she recalls a heavy flashback. Her patient, Neil Frank, starts choking on his own tongue. In an attempt to save him, Bedelia shoves her hand down his throat and kills him. Accidentally, the doubt lingers. Back in the present, she warns Graham that he can still save himself. Graham goes to talk to Lecter again, who gives him the final clue. The killer has has something to do with the Great Red Dragon paintings. At the Brooklyn Museum, Dollarhide pretends to be a writer to get access to the original Red Dragon painting, and, in a fit of pure madness, starts to eat the artwork. But Graham is also at the museum. He almost catches Dollarhide, but the man throws him out of an elevator and manages to escape. Graham runs up the stairs, but it's too late. Graham finally puts the pieces together and realizes that Lecter knows who the Tooth Fairy, Dollarhide, is. After all, it was Hannibal himself who sent him to check out the Great Red Dragon paintings. Meanwhile, Dollarhide is on the phone having a therapy session with Lecter. He says the dragon is telling him to kill Reba, the blind woman he's falling for. But Lecter, being the therapist from hell that he is, flips a switch in the guy's head and convinces him to please the dragon by killing someone else, Graham's family. That night, Dollarhide has a bizarre hallucination, believing he's actually becoming a dragon, complete with wings and a tail. Afterward, he watches home videos of Graham's family with Reba, who, being blind, has no idea what he's watching. The attack happens. Dollarhide breaks into Graham's house, but his wife Molly already had a bad feeling and manages to create a distraction to escape with her son. The madman still kills a driver who stops to help and shoots Molly in the shoulder, but they manage to get away. At the hospital, Bloom discovers that Lecter hasn't spoken to his lawyer in ages. The calls were to the Tooth Fairy. Now the FBI is going to tap the phone to catch the killer, but on the next call, Lecter simply tells Dollarhide they're listening and hangs up. As punishment, Bloom takes everything from Lecter, his books, drawings, and even his toilet. After the failure, Dollarhide breaks up with Reba in a twisted way, afraid the dragon will hurt her, and Graham confronts Lecter, who admits in no uncertain terms that he sent the killer after his family. That's when Graham understands Lecter's twisted logic. For him, murder isn't killing, it's transforming the victims. Graham goes for a therapy session with Bedelia and confesses that he's starting to imagine himself committing the Tooth Fairy's crimes. Bedelia not only confirms that Lecter orchestrated everything to take away his family, but drops the bomb. Lecter is in love with Graham, and she even asks if the feeling is mutual. Graham remains silent. Meanwhile, the FBI comes up with a kamikaze plan: provoke the killer to draw him out. They set up an interview with journalist Freddie Lowndes, using Graham and Dr. Chilton to say all sorts of harsh things about the Tooth Fairy, calling him a pervert. Dollarhide reads the article and is furious, but instead of going after Graham, he drags the poor guy to his place, straps him to a chair, and starts terrorizing him. In the midst of the chaos, Reba shows up for a visit, completely unaware that there's a doctor there, suffering horribly. After she leaves, Dollarhide forces Chilton to record a video retracting everything he said. Just when Chilton thinks he's about to be set free, Dollarhide attacks him. The FBI team watches the recording, horrified. Later, Dollarhide throws Chilton into a wheelchair and sets him on fire. At the hospital, completely disfigured, Chilton accuses Graham, saying he used him as bait on purpose by putting his hand on his shoulder in the interview photo. And to top it all off, Dollarhide goes after Reba and kidnaps her. Dollarhide takes Reba to his house, which is now a horror movie set. He douses everything in gasoline and sets the place on fire, but love wins out. He can't stand to see Reba die and performs an act of love, allowing her to escape. Graham tells Lecter that the Tooth Fairy is dead, says a final goodbye, and turns his back. But, surprise, Dollarhide is very much alive and attacks Graham at his hotel. He's disappointed by Lecter's betrayal, and Graham, in a moment of pure manipulation, suggests that he can transform Hannibal himself. The body at the house was a fake. Now the plan is to use Lecter as bait, faking an escape to lure Dollarhide. The plan goes wrong. On the way, Dollarhide shows up in full Fast and Furious mode, destroys the entire convoy, but spares Graham and Lecter. The two escape to Hannibal's cliffside house. The final confrontation happens there. Dollarhide breaks into the house and shoots Lecter. What follows is a dance of death. Graham and Lecter together stab and slash the Red Dragon until he finally falls. Wounded and covered in blood, the two embrace. Lecter says this is what he always wanted, and Graham agrees. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
And then in a final embrace, Graham throws himself off the cliff, taking Lecter with him. But wait, there's a post-credits scene. Bedelia stands before a lavishly set dining table, about to eat something far from appetizing. The camera reveals she's missing one of her own legs, and the table is set for 3. She picks up a fork, hides it, and the screen cuts to black. The question remains, who are the other guests?